The word gambling has long conjured specific images of poker tables, casino roulette wheels, or even sports betting. It evokes high rollers and devastating cash losses. But for younger generations, the perception is perhaps starting to change. Today, loot boxes, booster packs, and gacha games have fully integrated with video games. For many players, the term now brings to mind predatory practices, mediocre non-games, and a diverse range of generic anime characters. This association is not without reason. The complete gacha shock of 2012 in Japan proved these games were a formidable economic and cultural force. Their rise was so rapid and so aggressive that the government was compelled to intervene, applying pressure on the industry to protect its citizens, even at the potential risk of damaging a lucrative sector of its own economy. Yet the Japanese government's actions were notably precise. They targeted only the most egregious mechanic, the complete gacha, while leaving the core model intact as established previously. We can only speculate on the full reasoning. Perhaps it was an aversion to triggering a larger market panic or an unwillingness to engage in complex legal battles with industry giants. Whatever the reasons, the message was clear. Gacha games were here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. And in this new landscape, two games will emerge to define the next era. They avoided the pitfalls of their predecessors and were insightful enough in every other aspect. Their strategies were calculated, built upon the foundations laid by games that came before, like Dragon Collection. They elevated the model to unprecedented heights by focusing on core corporate maxims, which were casual appeal, broad demographic reach, and a monetization system that was simple to engage with but difficult to comprehend in its full scope. These would become the first billion-dollar gacha games. Up to this point, the architects of relatively successful gacha games were established industry players. Konami and Bandai Namco needed no introduction. Cygames was founded by experienced developers from Silicon Studio. Even Dina had been building its mobile platform for years. For a company without a major hit to enter this arena and succeed on its first attempt was nearly unfathomable. Yet that is the history of Gungho Online Entertainment, a company largely unknown outside of Japan. Unless you were familiar with the Asian MMO scene of the mid-2000s, or with Ninjala of all things. Gungho's origins were unconventional. It began in 1998 as Onsale Co. Limited, a joint venture between American auction site OnSale and the Japanese investment company SoftBank. Originally designed to enter the online auction space, but failed to compete with Yahoo Auctions. The company pivoted hard in 2002, rebranding as Gungho and securing the rights to operate the Korean MMO Ragnarok Online in Japan. For years, this was their entire identity. The stewards of a single, wildly successful MMO. Still, by 2014, Ragnarok Online was generating billions of yen, making Gungho one of Japan's fastest growing companies in spite of being 99% dependent on that one title. Their attempts to replicate this success with other licensed games, online or not, fell to the wayside. But this period gave them crucial experience in online services and mobile game management. By 2012, Gungho's leadership watched closely as the nascent industry raked in the money. They recognized the fast approaching changes happening thanks to the smartphone revolution, which turned phones from utilitarian devices into cosmopolitan portals for a new kind of entertainment. The time was ripe. Gungho brought on former Hudson employee Daisuke Yamamoto to produce a new mobile game. The project drew inspiration from an obscure 2009 puzzle card game, but was designed from the ground up to exploit every observable mobile trend. Centering on a simple 3-match puzzle system, designed to be played in portrait mode with a single thumb operating the whole game. Notably, then President Kazuki Morishita also ignored conventional key performance indicators used in traditional companies all the time, opting for an intuitive and maybe even contrarian approach that reflected the industry's currently stormy climate. This project culminated on February 20, 2012, with the release of Puzzle & Dragons on iOS. In a bold break from industry standards, Gungho completely bypassed social platforms like Gree and Mobage. They understood these platforms could take up 40% of revenue, plus another 10% for the mobile carrier. Instead, they released on iOS, Android, and the Amazon Kindle, where the standard commission was at most only 30%. Puzzle & Dragons was born as a fusion of a 3-match puzzle game and an RPG. Players dragged orbs on a 6x5 grid to match 3 or more of the same color, creating combos and attacks. They built a team of 5 monsters from a roster of thousands, each with unique skills that synergize with the puzzle gameplay. The broader gameplay loop involved dungeons, co-op play, and an immensely complex monster evolution system that grew more convoluted over the game's lifetime. Interestingly enough, storytelling was not an initial priority. More sophisticated narrative elements were added much later. And most importantly, the game's economy was run by magic stones, a very versatile premium currency. It restored energy, provided continuous, expanded storage, and was used for the gacha, obviously. The developers were famously generous with these stones, giving them away as apologies for server issues, a practice the Japanese player base dubbed apology stones, a precursor of the term that has since evolved and spread throughout these games. The gacha was performed by so-called rare egg machines, or gashadora, and it was comprehensive. It included free pulls using pull points from using a friend's monsters, galas and carnivals that focused on themes or elements, and highly anticipated godfests featuring exclusive, rare, and powerful monsters. But its most influential innovation was the collaborative gacha. Puzzle & Dragons codified the modern crossover event, bordering with popular anime and game franchises, adding limited-time dungeons and egg machines, creating intense pressure to pull for characters that might never return again. Some of its first collaborations were, fittingly, with Gungho's own licensed titles in Japan, like Ragnarok Online, but would eventually include some of the most recognized entertainment properties in Japanese media. These elements combined to make Puzzle & Dragons a household name in Japan by 2013. Its success was attributed to its casual puzzle appeal, hidden strategic depth, and ease of use. Across every single demographic that could hold a phone with one hand, from children to even grandparents. A critical decision sealed its fate. The game launched with a temporary free download campaign, as it wasn't a free-to-play title initially. After seeing how players became hooked on spending stones on the gacha, executives first extended the free download campaign before abolishing it entirely a few weeks after launch, and making the game completely free-to-play. This was probably the best decision they would ever make in their lives. Puzzle & Dragons closed 2012 as Gungho's most profitable venture, swiftly ending the company's dependence on Ragnarok Online. It was released worldwide with moderate success, but its home turf of Japan was always its most important market. In 2014, it became the first mobile game to ever surpass $1 billion in revenue, eventually grossing over $6 billion down the line. Its meteoric rise set a new example for the industry, but this miracle also created somewhat of a paradox. Gungho had transformed from a game operator into a bona fide giant on the strength of a single title. They attempt to capitalize with spin-offs, merchandise, a long-running anime, and more. Yet Puzzle & Dragons' popularity peaked in the mid-2010s. While still a remarkable earner today, it casts Gungho as a potential one-hit wonder, unable to replicate its success. Their subsequent titles have failed to capture the same lightning, leaving the company perpetually in the shadow of its own greatest hit. In the wake of Puzzle & Dragons' success, a wave of imitators flooded social gaming platforms like Mobage or Gree, but their history has only been tangentially related to gacha games so far, due to their presence being somewhat superfluous to the major success of Puzzle & Dragons. This will change when discussing Mixi, which has a particularly important story in the context of gacha games. Founded in 2004, originally as an invite-only general-purpose social network, much like Facebook, it was once the platform to be in for the average Japanese netizen. But a series of blunders at the decade's end saw its market share eviscerated by the aforementioned social network alongside Twitter. Mixi failed to adapt to the smartphone era and was stigmatized as outdated for a myriad of reasons, including being hard to plan around for developers and possessing a laggy, unresponsive interface. By the time 2013 arrived, Mixi's core business was in serious trouble. In a desperate pivot, the company leveraged its remaining tech to develop a game. They recruited a man named Yoshiki Okamoto, a veteran producer who had worked for Konami and Capcom on franchises like Street Fighter and Resident Evil, but had moved on to mobile development due to then recent financial decisions. Okamoto devised a simple, intuitive game built around the smartphone's touchscreen. Players will flick their characters like pinballs into enemies, all while incorporating Mixi's native expertise in social connectivity, focusing heavily on local co-op functionality to create a shared experience. The result was Monster Strike, released in September 2013. The gameplay was energetic and thrilling, a blend of skill and luck as players angled shots to trigger bounces all across the screen. It wasn't exactly real time though. Each flick reduced our counter on enemies, and when it hit 0, they would attack, reducing your HP. Your monster team of 4, with different skills and behaviors, providing a need for tactical decision making and planning. Similarly as Puzzle & Dragons, the story was minimal, and the monster enhancement system, while robust, was less convoluted than its competitor could be, all in an effort to reward constant player engagement and loyalty. This time around, the premium currency was named Orbs, earned through gameplay or purchased with real money. Its uses were industry standard by now. Continuous storage expansion, energy refills, and most importantly, the gacha. These hatchers drew clear influence from Dragon Collection, featuring common, free, and premium versions with various spins to entice spending. It also featured a monthly subscription, the Month Pass, which offered significant benefits including free monster enhancements, a guaranteed 5-star or 6-star every 3 months, XP boosts from quests, a free daily energy recovery, and other benefits that will be added later. With all of that said, Monster Strike did not become an overnight sensation. Its first few months were kind of middling, but the reception was solid, and Mixi's stock began to recover from its all-time low. The developers were quick in reacting to feedback, enhancing the co-op features until the game became a popular social event, capturing a wide demographic, especially from children to young adults, who treated it like a party game. Mixi then spent billions of yen on aggressive advertising and expansion into other Asian markets like China and Hong Kong in collaboration with Tencent. This push resulted in Monster Strike overtaking Puzzle & Dragons by the end of 2014. At first, just for a little while, but later, the two titans began trading the top spot on the Asian app stores monthly. Mixi even created a dedicated studio in 2015, X-Flag, to oversee the franchise and even launched a successful animated series on its own YouTube channel. While Puzzle & Dragons was the first gacha game to break the $1 billion mark in revenue, Monster Strike became the highest grossing mobile app of its time, generating over $7.2 billion in lifetime revenue by 2018, all without ever officially releasing in the West. Monster Strike had performed a miracle, rescued a dying social network, and catapulted Mixi into the ranks of gaming's most profitable stewards. But like Gungho, Mixi had found itself defined by a single title. Any attempts to develop games beyond Monster Strike spin-offs or licensed ventures have been lost, buried by the overwhelming shadow of its success. The company remains completely dependent on its one single hit. The rise of these two juggernauts in both Puzzle & Dragons and Monster Strike reveals a poignant truth. In the mid-2010s, creating the most successful gacha game did not necessarily translate into building a successful game development company or franchise. The stigma of being a one-hit wonder is powerful, and luck seems to play an undeniable role in achieving such astronomical, singular success. Before 2015, gacha games had become a plague upon every mobile storefront and social network. They had even begun arriving to the West in the guise of card games, simplistic RPGs, puzzle games, or the most basic of tapping apps that could hardly be considered video games. All of them at least with eye-catching art styles, or taking beloved properties as leverage to trick players into picking them up in the off chance they could be wrestled into spending, even a little, for whatever in-game microtransactions they decided to include in their monetization systems. The app market was, and frankly still is, filled with all kinds of games that can best be described as cash grabs or shovelware. Their stories may seem all too familiar, no matter their origin. You have the drawn-out failures, successful games with successful developers and publishers, but completely fumbled the transition into a planned sequel, killing both games completely. Or the forgotten games, those that maybe had first move advantage by arriving in the West soon after the Japanese smelled success in gacha games, and maybe even managed to capture player bases that might still remember them today, but got outcompeted by their rivals, barely leaving a dent in the industry. Just another unmarked grave. And what about sheer numbers? You don't need complex gameplay, just a simple hook and tons of art assets to claim your video game has hundreds, even thousands of playable characters. The game might still end of service in the long run, but you can always try again. Maybe take a different approach altogether, like the Korean developers. Build beautiful graphics and aesthetics, but aggressively monetize PvP and the resource grind, making the game a gacha in all but name, and still be successful enough to warrant a sequel after the original game runs out of steam. But why not skip the gacha name altogether and end up totally lost in translation? Attempt to introduce Japanese-style mobile gaming to the West, gacha included, but fail spectacularly, only managing to prove that market is far less tolerant to these practices, at least when implemented in such a shameless and unscrupulous way that only leaves a bad aftertaste from such a blatant disregard to your company's values. However, these stories are far too interesting. The average gacha game, then and now, only falls silent suddenly, announcing their end of service on an unimportant day when they've outlived their use as a corporate tool to extract revenue from consumers. No player weeps, no executive speaks of them beyond financial reports, and companies rarely list them in their product page. It might be refreshing to hear, but for every profitable mega success like Puzzle and Dragons or Monster Strike, there are dozens of failures with similar stories, which makes it all the more important to point out those who stand out for one reason or another, but still contribute something to the continued conversation that are video games as a whole, because the world might not see a success like this anytime soon, right? So might as well focus on those that were or are still fresh in our memories. That one next pull could still change everything.